Shavua Tov. It seems like we're shooting at the wrong target when we sit down for the Passover Seder, and the Haggadah itself says it. The Haggadah says, "Go forth and see what Lavan Harami, the father-in-law of Yaakov, sought to do. That Pharaoh only decreed against the boys, having the male babies thrown into the river, but Lavan sought to uproot everything." So instead of celebrating the victory over Pharaoh and the exodus from Egypt, apparently we should be celebrating the victory over Lavan and the fact that Yaakov and his family fled from Aram Naharaim, and yet we are not. That's a very strange claim by the Haggadah, and even more so, Pharaoh actually did throw the baby boys into the river. He had blood on his hands. Lavan, what did he do? The worst we can find is that after the whole story with Yaakov and Lavan being there, and Yaakov realizes that it's dangerous for him to stay any longer, for reasons that are part of the story, so he flees. And Lavan chases him, and when he catches him, he says to him, Yesh le'el yadi la'asot imachem ra. I have the power to do bad to you, but the God of your fathers came to me last night and said to me, do not speak to Jacob from good to bad. In other words, leave him alone. Is that the worst we can get? In other words, a threat, an evil intention, and that makes him worse than Pharaoh, who threw Jewish babies into the river? How can we understand this? What is the story with Lavan? Who is this Lavan? He is much more significant than we may think. As a matter of fact, at the end of this Dvar Torah, we will hear about who Rabbi Yonatan, the author of the Ben Uziel, the author of the Targum Yonatan, claims that Lavan really was. The rabbis very often will identify one biblical character with another. For example, the refugee who told Abraham that the cities of stone where his nephew was living had been captured. That refugee, that Palit, as the Torah calls him, was none other than Og Melech HaBashan, another famous character who comes up in the book of Devarim. Of the book of Bamidbar, excuse me. The rabbis do that, and we will see a fascinating identification of who Lavan really is at the end of this Dvar Torah. But let's take a look at the stories of Lavan and see if we can figure out what makes this man tick and why he is so important. So first of all, Yaakov shows up, and he's fleeing his brother Esav, and he falls in love with Rachel, the younger of the two sisters. Lavan agrees to let him marry her if he works for 7 years, which he does, and then he has the wedding, and when the lights are out, Lavan switches Rachel and puts in her place Leah, the older daughter, and Yaakov marries her without realizing. When he finds out in the morning that he had been tricked, he's furious with Lavan, but Lavan says to him, Lo ye'asachen b'mkomenu, it's not done in our place to give the younger daughter before the older daughter. So fulfill the celebrations of Leah this week, and then you can have Rachel for the work that you're going to do for me for another 7 years. Wow, Lavan is an artist. He succeeds in getting the victim to feel like the guilty party. Yaakov, you're not beseder, marrying the younger daughter? And it goes even further than that. The commentaries see that Lavan was really giving Yaakov a big criticism. What was it? The Torah says that Leah had soft eyes because she was crying, the rabbis explain, because she was crying because she knew that Yitzchak had 2 sons. The older was Esav, and she was the older daughter. She was going to end up having to marry Esav being a fairly wild individual, as we know. And so she was crying because this was to be her fate. Well, Lavan says to Yaakov, guess what? Leah is going to marry Esav. Not exactly Esav, but she's going to marry somebody who went into his father and said, I am Esav, your Bechor, your firstborn. You see, Yaakov, in our place, the younger ones don't cut in line. In other words, he makes Yaakov out to be the bad guy in the whole story. That's art. That's really something. What is it with this guy, Lavan? There are a couple of other stories that are significant that we should ask about. And one of them is, at the end of the whole time, so Yaakov stays there and marries the 2 sisters, and they have also handmaids, and he has 11 of his 12 children, and then the time comes when he's got to get his salary, so Lavan says, I'm going to pay you because I have divined that God has blessed me on your behalf. We see that Lavan has some knowledge of of witchcraft. He's able to get spiritual messages. And so Yaakov tells him the whole thing. I'll take out all the speckled and spotted of the flocks, And then whatever is born, speckled and spotted from the ones that you leave with me, that'll be mine. And he becomes very rich from this because Yaakov understands Mendelian genetics. So after that, Yaakov sees that Lavan and his family are not looking at him with a smile anymore, so he realizes, I have to flee. He flees. But as he's leaving, Rachel, his wife, and Lavan's daughter, steals her father's teraphim. What are teraphim? It's apparently an idol of some sort. It's a divining rod, as it were, some kind of a idol that lets the person tell the future. Interesting. There's a whole discussion what the teraphim are, but she steals that from Lavan. And then Yaakov and the family, they flee. And Lavan pursues Yaakov. And then finally he catches up to him and gives him a litany of his complaints. Now, psychologically, we know that when a person has a list of complaints, usually the last thing they say is the one that really is getting them inside. And so Lavan gives this whole litany of complaints, and then he concludes with the question, Lama ganavta et Elohai? Why did you steal my gods? In other words, that the theft of the teraphim, that he doesn't know who did it, that's the thing that really sticks in his craw. That's the thing that really bothers him. Interesting. Why so? Why is that it? One other detail. After God comes to Lavan in a dream, so again, by the way, we see that Lavan does receive prophecy, so he's not a simple person by any means. So Lavan says to Yaakov, okay, let's make an agreement. We're not going to cross over this boundary line to do harm to each other. Let's make a stone pillar, a stone monument. They make the monument, and Lavan names it Yegar Sahaduta, which translates as a pile of stones for a witness. A witnessing stone pile, if you will. And Yaakov, says the Torah, calls it Gal-Eid, which means a witnessing stone pile. Same exact name, except Lavan is saying it in Aramaic, and Yaakov is saying it in Hebrew. Why does the Torah tell us this disagreement? Is this such a significant thing? Whether you're going to say it in Aramaic or say it in Hebrew, it's the same name. What's that about? So in order to answer a lot of these questions, we need to understand a difficult truth. And that is that the Jewish people have enemies who wish to destroy them. And they can do it in two ways. One way is the way of killing. The other way is the way of hugging. The killers, we know, this is Amalek, Haman, Hitler, Yamach Shemam v'Zichram. We know these. That's the open type of enmity. But the far more dangerous one is those who seek to destroy us through hugging, to get us to assimilate, to simply stop being Jewish. And they may do it without malice in their hearts, but they do it nonetheless. I remember when I was young, I was going to a day camp in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, in America, and it was a non-Jewish camp, and the director was a very nice man. We all loved him. But every Wednesday was the camp barbecue. And so I would show up with my kosher hamburger patties and my tinfoil to put on the grill so that it could be cooked for me in a kosher fashion. And he was the guy that ran the grill. And whenever I would do that, he would always look at me and make some comment about, why can't you just be like everybody else? Why do you have to have this special food? Why is it cleaner? Is it better? Is it healthier? It was blessed. And, that kind of a thing. That's the destruction that comes about through hugging. The fact that we get welcomed into a society, and this happens more in the Western world today, so much so that we begin to lose our sense of Jewish identity, and intermarriage and all of that is at scary rates. Really, there is a silent Holocaust happening, not with any violence, but through the hugging. And these are two different types of enemies. The Haggadah is telling us that as bad as the pharaohs of the world are, the ones who want to destroy us through hitting and through killing, the more dangerous one is Lavan, the one who does it through hugging, because we don't know that we're supposed to beware of them. And it is much more insidious. And I believe that was Lavan. Lavan wanted to bring Yaakov into his world and to cause him to assimilate. That was his goal. So perhaps the moment when Lavan is most dangerous is not at the end when he threatens Yaakov, I could have done evil to you, but rather at the very beginning when he hugs him and he says, Ach atzmi uvesari ata, you are myself, you are my flesh, you are one of us. Now, why is it that Lavan wants to hug Yaakov and wants him to assimilate? I believe that Lavan sees himself as being an equal competitor to Abraham and Yitzchak. They are known as great theologians. They are transforming faith in the land of Canaan. And Lavan himself is no slouch when it comes to prophecy, as we have seen. God comes to him in dreams. He has these teraphim, which give him the ability to tell the future. As a matter of fact, he says to Yaakov in so many words, when Yaakov is preparing to go, before he runs away, he's saying to Lavan, at some point I'm going to want to go. And Lavan says to him, I have to pay you your salary because I have divined that God has blessed me because of you. So Lavan is aware of what's happening in heaven. God does communicate with Lavan. Lavan, when he chases after Yaakov, he makes equal reference to the God of Nachor, which is his grandfather, together with the God of Abraham, who is Yaakov's grandfather. In other words, he sees himself as an equal, as a competitor. And that's why he's hugging Yaakov, because he also sees Yaakov as the chance to really win that battle. If he can win over Yaakov and get him to stay with him, then he is going to be the victor. And Lavan makes an outrageous comment when he sees he's failing, because he's a bitter man, because he does fail. And we'll see in a moment why he's so bitter. But he says to Yaakov, he says at some point in anger, your sons, the sons are mine, the daughters are mine, the flocks are mine, everything is mine. In other words, not only did he fail to integrate Yaakov into his religion, but Yaakov is taking his daughters and the children that they bore him and the flocks that Yaakov got through those means mentioned before, out and taking them back to the competition, back to the land of Canaan, to Abraham and Yitzchak's territory. So Lavan is the great failure. And why is he the most furious about his teraphim being stolen? Because that's his tool. That's how he is the great and powerful Oz, the great and powerful Lavan. But the difference between Lavan and Abraham and Yitzchak, on the other hand, is that Abraham and Yitzchak use themselves in the service of God, and Lavan uses God in the service of Lavan. In other words, Lavan is somebody who believes in entitlement. Everything is mine, and anybody who's trying to take something from me they are the criminal, I am the victim. Whereas Abraham says to God when he's negotiating for Sodom, he says, Anochi afar va'efer, I am dust, I am ashes, I'm a nothing. I'm only here, God, to serve you. Abraham, when he's 90 years old and sitting there, or 99 years old, and he's sitting there at the entrance to his tent on this hot day after having been circumcised, he sees some people, some merchants walking by, Arabs, whatever they were, and he gets up and runs to get them because he is a man of service. Lavan sees himself as the one who must be receiving the homage, receiving the honor, receiving the glory. And therefore, when people repudiate him, he's bitter, he bites back, he makes them feel like the victim. That is the difference between Abraham and Lavan. And so this might explain also why the name of the monument that's to serve as their peace boundary, as it were, their neutral zone, to use a Star Trek term, is whether it should be in Aramaic, Yigar Sahaduta, stone pile of witness, of testimony, or Gal Eid, stone pile of testimony, same thing, because Lavan says to Yaakov, speak Aramaic, this is our language, this is our culture, join us. Why do you have to be different? Be like us. And Yaakov says, no, Gal Eid, Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue, that's what I speak. I'm not coming over to your Aramaic culture. Even though Jews later did speak Aramaic, that was not because of assimilation, but Lavan intended an assimilatory change in the name. And so Yaakov rejected that completely, and that was the end, apparently, of the story of Lavan, because the Torah says Lavan then kissed his daughters and grandchildren and went back to his place, and it would seem that that's the last we will hear from Lavan. But Yonatan ben Uziel says, no, Lavan will come back in another name, and we will get to know him quite well. In the book of Numbers, he will reappear as a fellow by the name of Bilam. Lavan and Bilam, says the Yonatan ben Uziel, are the same person. Wow, what a perfectly appropriate identification, because Bilam was the equal of Moses in the power of his prophecy, and he was the one who set himself up as an alternative to the Jewish prophets of Moshe and Am Yisrael at that time. And we also know that Bilam had certain character flaws which are very similar to Lavan. For example, he was greedy. Lavan was clearly greedy. He was cheating at every turn and every corner. And he also was an extremely self-centered person, as was Lavan. So we have many reasons to compare Lavan to Bilam. And of course, Bilam was a very internationally significant person, as Lavan was. We shouldn't think this was just a small story of individuals on a farm somewhere in Mesopotamia. The lesson and the moral of the story is that we certainly know the enemies who proclaim their hatred for us, and unfortunately nowadays we're hearing them speak louder and louder in the Western world, and we need to be on our guard. But perhaps we have always needed to be on our guard against a far more insidious enemy, the one we don't know to watch out for, the one who wishes to hug us to death, the one who wishes to cause us to feel uncomfortable about being Jews, uncomfortable about our traditions, about our outlooks and perspectives. And it is important for us, perhaps at the Seder Pesach, to make that victory clear, because at the Seder Pesach we are not just defeating Pharaoh and recollecting the exodus from Egypt, we are defeating Lavan, the ones who come to hug us, the ones who say, Ach, atzmi v'sari, you are my flesh, you are myself. We're defeating them by sitting there at the Seder Pesach and reaffirming our Jewish identity, our commitment to Torah, our commitment to mitzvot, and our commitment to remaining who we are. Shavua Tov.